They were just kids, two brothers lost in the cold, trapped in a pit with no way out. Everyone thought it would end there, until a German shepherd named Shadow broke free. What started as a rescue for two became a race to save 23 more, children hidden away in the dark by a man who thought no one would ever find them. What happened next will restore your faith in instinct, courage, and the bond between a dog and his partner. Before we start, tell me where you're watching from. Drop your country in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. And if you believe no child should ever be left behind, hit that subscribe button, because what you're about to hear will stay with you forever. The first snow of December lay heavy over Green Hollow, a small mountain town pressed into the ridges of West Virginia. The air was sharp and metallic, the kind of cold that clung to the lungs and made every breath sting. Smoke curled from a few chimneys along Main Street, drifting into a pale sky streaked with low, heavy clouds. Beyond the last row of houses, the land sloped down into a wide valley of pine and oak, their limbs bending under the weight of ice. Out there, the forest grew deep, old, and silent, a place that held its own rules. Ryan Porter stood by the open back door of his patrol SUV, adjusting the straps on his gloves. At 39, he had the posture of a man who had been trained never to rush without reason. Broad-shouldered but lean, his dark brown hair had begun to silver at the temples, and a pale scar traced the edge of his left eyebrow, a memento from his early days on the force. His eyes were a weathered green, the kind that carried both calculation and quiet empathy. 6 months earlier, he'd stepped away from the badge to care for his wife, Emma, through a long and uncertain illness. Now, back in uniform, the work felt heavier in his hands, but not unfamiliar. At his side, moving with a steady confidence, was Shadow, a 6-year-old male German shepherd with a black and tan coat that seemed to drink in what little light the winter offered. The sable markings along his back gave him the illusion of perpetual motion, even when he stood still. His right ear stood sharp, the left tipped forward from an old injury, a flaw that only made him look more seasoned. His amber eyes were sharp but never hard, always seeming to ask a silent question. Shadow's name had not come from a list or a handbook, but from the night Ryan had pulled him from the floodwaters 3 years earlier. The spring rains had turned the Valley River into a violent sweep of brown, swallowing roads and fences. While patrolling the far banks in the dark, Ryan had spotted what looked like a moving patch of shadow clinging to a drifting log. It was only when he waded in and dragged the half-starved, trembling creature to shore that he realized it was a German shepherd. So soaked and black against the water, he had looked like nothing more than a silhouette. In the days after, Shadow barely left Ryan's side. It was a bond forged in the quiet, in the spaces between fear and relief. This morning's schedule had been simple: scent drills in the lower meadow before the snow deepened further. But the voice on the radio cracked that plan apart. Unit 4, possible juvenile missing, 2 males, ages 8 and 10. Last seen near the Miller property heading toward the eastern tree line, overdue by several hours. Ryan's hand stilled on the leash clip. Unit 4 copies, he replied, his voice even but his gut tightening. The Millers lived at the far edge of Green Hollow, their property backing into some of the roughest ground in the area. A patchwork of old quarry pits, abandoned logging trails, and gullies hidden under leaf fall and snow. Robert Miller was a wiry man in his 40s, a mechanic by trade with oil ingrained under his nails no matter how hard he scrubbed. His wife, Diane, taught 3rd grade and had the kind of steady kindness that made her popular with every student who passed through her classroom. Their boys, Jake and Tommy, were as close as brothers could be. Jake, 10, had his father's protective streak and a habit of watching his younger brother more than he watched himself. Tommy, 8, was all restless curiosity, always poking sticks into holes and wandering just a little farther than he should. According to dispatch, the brothers had set out to build a fort somewhere near the tree line just after lunch. By mid-afternoon, when the light was already fading, they had not returned. The temperature was dropping fast, the kind of cold that could take hold in hours. Ryan swung the SUV onto the Miller's long gravel drive, now crusted in ice. Diane met him at the porch, her face pale against the red scarf wound around her neck. "They know the woods," she said, breath hitching in the cold air, "but not in this weather." "We'll find them," Ryan said, meaning it. He let Shadow hop down from the SUV, the dog's breath puffing white in the air. "Let's work," he murmured, unclipping the lead. Shadow lowered his head to the snow, nostrils flaring. Within moments, he angled toward the back of the property, where a split-rail fence gave way to a narrow opening between pines. Ryan followed, eyes scanning the ground until he spotted them. 2 sets of small boot prints pressed into the powder. The stride was uneven, like boys at play, weaving back and forth before straightening toward the deeper woods. They moved quickly, Shadow leading, Ryan's boots crunching over frozen leaves beneath the snow. The wind grew sharper under the trees, carrying a dry scent of pine and something else, an emptiness that made Ryan's shoulders tense. The trail dipped toward a low stretch of ground he knew too well from maps, unstable, riddled with sinkholes and old excavation scars. And then, just ahead, the prints wavered and blurred, half filled with wind-blown snow. Ryan slowed. Shadow stopped entirely, ears pricked, body leaning forward into the still air as if listening for something far beyond human hearing. The dog's tail stiffened, nose working furiously. Ryan tightened his grip on the lead, eyes on the fading trail. Somewhere ahead lay the reason for this sudden alertness, and whatever it was, they were about to find it. Shadow's muscles tensed, his body leaning forward as if the earth itself was whispering a direction only he could hear. His amber eyes tracked the faint trail ahead, nostrils flaring against the sharp scent of snow and something else, sweat, fear, and the stale tang of cold air trapped underground. Ryan gave a short, quiet command, "Track," and the German shepherd surged ahead, his paws kicking up light powder as he followed the ghost of the boy's trail. The prints in the snow became erratic, one set slightly deeper than the other, as though one of the boys had stumbled or slowed. The forest here was darker, with thick spruce crowding out the light and the ground falling away in gentle but dangerous slopes. The temperature dipped noticeably, the air heavy and still, and Ryan knew from the terrain map in his head that they were closing in on one of the old limestone pits, long abandoned but never properly filled. He kept his pace steady but urgent, scanning ahead for depressions in the snow. A voice called from behind. Deputy Carla Jensen, a compact woman in her early 30s with a sharp jawline and short auburn hair barely visible under her knit cap. Carla had joined the Green Hollow Sheriff's Office 2 years ago after leaving city policing in Charleston. She had a reputation for level-headedness under stress, born from years of breaking up bar fights and talking down armed suspects. "Anything?" she asked, her breath clouding in the cold. "Shadows on it," Ryan replied without looking back. Carla adjusted the strap of the medical kit slung across her shoulder and quickened her pace to match his. Shadow's sudden bark cut through the muffled silence like a gunshot. He stopped abruptly near a patch of churned snow, front paws planted at the edge of what looked like a sagging mound. Ryan stepped forward and felt the ground dip under his boots. The mound wasn't solid, it was the rim of a hole, cleverly disguised under snow and leaves. He crouched, brushing away debris until the darkness beneath opened like a mouth. A faint sound drifted up, a thin, shivering voice. "Help!" Ryan's pulse spiked. "I see them," he called to Carla, then leaned over the edge. 10 feet below, 2 small figures huddled together, their winter coats soaked through, cheeks flushed with cold. Jake's arms were wrapped tightly around Tommy, who was shivering violently, his lips tinged blue. "We can't get out," Jake's voice cracked. Ryan unclipped the rescue rope from his pack and looped it around a nearby tree trunk, testing the knot with a sharp tug. "Carla, anchor here," he instructed. She planted herself at the rope's base, bracing with her boots. Ryan descended halfway, boots finding purchase on the packed earth of the pit's wall, and reached for Jake first. The boy's small, icy hand clung to his glove, grip desperate. "One at a time, buddy. You're safe now." He hoisted Jake upward toward Carla, who pulled the boy into her arms and wrapped a foil blanket around him. Ryan reached back down for Tommy. The younger boy hesitated, eyes darting to Shadow's head, peering over the rim. "That your dog?" Tommy whispered. "Yeah," Ryan said, managing a quick smile. "He's the one who found you." That was enough. Tommy grasped Ryan's forearm, and together they scrambled up to solid ground. Carla moved quickly, checking each boy for obvious injuries. "No broken bones," she murmured, "but they're both hypothermic." She pulled extra blankets from her kit, tucking them tight around the boy's shoulders. Jake tried to speak, but his teeth chattered so hard it came out in fragments. Ryan crouched beside them, his coat unzipped so he could pull Tommy closer to his own body heat. Shadow sat just behind, ears swiveling, his gaze locked protectively on the boys. The sound of crunching snow signaled another arrival paramedic, Chris Landon, a tall, barrel-chested man in his 40s with a salt and pepper beard and the calm eyes of someone who had seen panic too many times to be rattled by it. Chris had been a firefighter before switching to EMS after a knee injury ended his ladder-climbing days. "Heard you've got 2 cold ones," he said, kneeling beside Carla to assess the boys. His voice was deep but gentle, the kind that made frightened children unclench. Ryan stepped back to give them space, pulling his phone from his jacket. There were 3 missed calls from an unknown hospital number. His gut clenched. He moved a few paces away, answering in a low voice. On the other end, a nurse from the regional medical center explained that his wife, Emma, had been admitted after experiencing severe dizziness and shortness of breath. "She's stable for now, but we'd like you here as soon as you can," the nurse said. Ryan closed his eyes briefly, pressing a hand to the cold bark of a nearby pine. He wanted to be there immediately, but 2 shivering boys and a search team still needed his attention. "I'll be there as soon as possible," he said quietly before hanging up. He glanced back toward the boy's Tommy now leaning against Carla, Jake holding a cup of warm electrolyte drink Chris had handed him. Shadow padded over, nudging Ryan's leg with his muzzle. Ryan rested a hand on the dog's head, the familiar weight grounding him. "One thing at a time, pal," he murmured. He turned back to Chris. "We can get them to the ambulance from here?" Chris nodded. "I've got a sled stretcher coming up the trail now. We'll wrap them in heated blankets, get their core temps back up. They'll be fine." As if on cue, another figure appeared through the trees. Rookie Deputy Miles Turner, barely 22, tall and lanky with a mop of blonde hair sticking out from under his beanie. He carried the folded stretcher awkwardly, his breath coming hard. "Sorry, took the long way," he puffed. Miles was eager and well-meaning, but still learning to match his enthusiasm with practical skill. He set the stretcher down and unfolded it, helping Chris secure Jake first, then Tommy. Shadow paced in a slow circle, nose brushing the snow as though making sure nothing else had been left behind. The moment the boys were secured, he settled beside Ryan, his gaze still sweeping the tree line. "Let's move," Ryan said, picking up one end of the stretcher while Miles took the other. The snow crunched underfoot, each step carrying them closer to the waiting ambulance. The walk back was slow, the air warming slightly as the sun tried to push through the cloud cover. Ryan could hear the boys murmuring softly under their blankets, comforted now by the steady rhythm of adult footsteps and Shadow's presence beside them. He tried to keep his mind on their safe arrival, but the thought of Emma in a hospital bed refused to loosen its grip. For now, though, the job wasn't over, and until it was, he couldn't let himself split in 2. By the time they reached the clearing where the ambulance waited, the snow had begun to fall again, light flakes drifting through the cold air. Chris and Carla loaded the boys inside, tucking the heated blankets around them while the vehicle's heater blasted warm air. Ryan stood just outside the open doors, Shadow pressed against his leg, watching as the boys began to relax under the warmth. Jake looked up at him, eyes heavy-lidded. "Thanks," he mumbled. Ryan nodded, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "You thank him," he said, tipping his head toward Shadow. The German Shepherd's tail thumped once against the snow, a quiet acknowledgement that the trail he had followed had led exactly where it needed to. The back doors of this ambulance had just closed, and warm air was beginning to swirl around the 2 bundled boys inside. Ryan stood a few steps away with Shadow at his side, his gloved hand absently resting on the dog's neck. Snowflakes clung to the shepherd's sable fur, melting slowly against the heat of his body. Paramedic Chris Landon was still inside with Tommy, checking his core temperature, while Deputy Carla Jensen leaned on the open passenger door, speaking quietly to dispatch about closing down the search area. Rookie Miles Turner was busy coiling the rope Ryan had used earlier, his long fingers clumsy in thick winter gloves. Ryan took a moment to kneel by the open rear door of the ambulance. Jake was sitting upright now, still wrapped in foil blankets, his cheeks flushed from the heater but eyes heavy from exhaustion. Tommy, smaller and paler, leaned into his brother's side with his eyes closed. Chris glanced up at Ryan, then nodded toward the boys. "They're both stable enough for transport, but we'll keep a close eye on Tommy. His body temp dropped lower than I'd like." Ryan gave a quiet nod, then focused on Jake. "You did a good job keeping your brother warm out there." Jake hesitated, his gaze shifting toward the dark tree line beyond the clearing. His voice was soft when he spoke. "Before we fell in the hole, I think I heard something." Ryan tilted his head. "What kind of something?" The boy's small hands tightened on the blanket. "Crying, like a little kid, way out past where we were, but it was faint, and I thought, maybe I imagined it. Ryan studied him for a long moment. Jake's eyes were steady despite the tremor in his voice, and Ryan had learned long ago that children rarely invented details in situations like this. Was it before you slipped? Jake nodded. Yeah, just a minute before. Ryan gave a small, reassuring smile. Thanks for telling me. That's important. He reached into his jacket pocket for a small hand warmer packet and pressed it into Jake's hands. Hang on to that until you get to the hospital. He stepped back from the ambulance, intending to make a mental note to sweep the area later. But before he could even turn toward Carla, Shadow's head snapped up. The dog's ears were pricked forward, his gaze fixed on a point deep within the forest. Then came the sound one short, sharp bark that cut through the soft hum of the idling ambulance. Shadow? Ryan's voice was calm but alert. The shepherd was already pulling against the leash, muscles bunched, claws scraping at the snow. His amber eyes didn't waver from whatever lay beyond the tree line. Ryan tightened his grip on the lead. Easy. But the dog only let out another, louder bark, tail stiff, whole body quivering with urgency. Carla looked up from her call. What's he got? She asked, moving closer. Ryan shook his head. Don't know yet. Shadow gave a deep, throaty whine and lunged again, this time dragging Ryan a half-step forward. The leash strained taut between them, the leather creaking in Ryan's gloved hands. From inside the ambulance, Jake leaned forward, eyes wide. That's where I heard it. The crying. He's looking right where it came from. Ryan's stomach tightened. Coincidence or not, he'd learned to trust Shadow's instincts. They were rarely wrong. The dog's agitation grew, his front paws stamping the ground as if trying to climb toward the trees. Ryan crouched, meeting the shepherd's intense gaze. What is it, boy? He murmured. But Shadow didn't wait for permission. With a sudden, forceful jerk, he wrenched the leash free from Ryan's grip, the clasp snapping open against the strain. Snow sprayed from his paws as he launched forward, disappearing into the first line of pines. Shadow! Ryan's voice cracked into the cold air, but the dog was already weaving between the trees, his dark coat blending with the shadows until only the sound of breaking branches marked his path. Ryan's pulse kicked hard. He glanced back toward Carla. Stay with the boys. I'm going after him. Carla's brow furrowed, but she gave a curt nod, already moving to stand guard by the ambulance. Ryan plunged into the woods, following the trail of paw prints Shadow left behind. The snow here was deeper, muffling his steps, and the dim light under the dense canopy made the air feel heavier. Branches clawed at his sleeves as he pushed through, the sound of the ambulance fading behind him. Up ahead, Shadow barked again, short, urgent bursts that echoed between the trees. The sound drew Ryan toward a slight incline where the snow was disturbed in a strange pattern, as though something had been dragged or pushed through. He knelt, brushing away the powder. Beneath was a faint track, narrow and winding, leading further into the darkness. He straightened, scanning the area. There was no sign of anyone yet, but the pattern was deliberate, not the random chaos of fallen branches or animal movement. His breath curled in the frigid air as he listened, just the wind whispering through the spruce, and somewhere in the distance, the faint, rhythmic panting of a dog on the move. Behind him, the forest closed in again, quiet but for the occasional groan of ice shifting on branches. Ryan adjusted his grip on his flashlight, its beam cutting a narrow path through the gloom. Whatever had caught Shadow's attention, it wasn't going to let the shepherd rest until he found it. The forest thickened the farther Ryan went, the trail of paw prints winding like a dark ribbon through the snow. His breath fogged heavily now, sweat cooling fast under his jacket. Shadow's barks grew sharper, closer together, urgent and insistent, until suddenly they stopped. Ryan slowed, the sudden silence pressing in from all sides. Then, through the branches ahead, he saw the faint outline of a structure, a squat cabin, weathered to gray, half swallowed by the trees. Its roof sagged under a thick layer of snow, and the chimney leaned at a dangerous angle. The windows were boarded from the inside, the boards darkened by age and damp. Shadow stood stiff-legged in front of the door, his hackles raised, tail held low but steady. A muffled sound leaked from behind the warped wood, a sound that froze Ryan mid-step. It was a sob, high-pitched and trembling, followed by a shushing whisper, as though someone inside was trying to quiet a frightened child. Ryan's eyes swept the clearing. The snow here was trampled in strange, uneven patches, as though many small feet had moved back and forth in confined space. His hand went to the radio on his shoulder. Unit 4 to dispatch. I've got a structure, possibly occupied. Send backup to my coordinates. Urgent. Static crackled. Then Carla's voice came back, tight but calm. Copy that. Backup en route. I'm coming in with Miles. Within minutes, Carla appeared through the trees, her auburn hair damp from melting snow. Miles followed, his lanky frame moving awkwardly over the uneven ground, rifle slung across his back but his face pale. What's the plan? Carla asked, eyes flicking to the cabin. We make entry, Ryan said quietly. He approached the door, noting the heavy padlock rusted into place. Shadow paced near the threshold, ears flicking toward the sound inside. The sobbing was clearer now, joined by faint coughs and the occasional rustle of movement. Listen, Miles whispered. For a moment they all stood still, and the sound of at least a dozen children breathing shallow, uneven slid through the cracks in the wood. Ryan met Carla's gaze. We're not waiting. Miles stepped back and swung the butt of his rifle hard against the padlock. The first blow splintered part of the frame. The second sent the lock crashing to the snow. Ryan shoved the door inward, and a gust of stale, warm air rolled out, carrying the smell of unwashed bodies and mildew. Inside, the dim light revealed a sight that rooted them all to the floor. 23 children, ranging from toddlers to early teens, huddled together in the center of the single room. Their clothes were mismatched and dirty, some wearing only socks on their feet, others wrapped in thin blankets. The floor was bare wood, the walls lined with crude shelves holding dented cans of food and cracked plastic jugs of water. The children's eyes widened at the sight of strangers, some shrinking back, others leaning forward as if desperate to close the distance. A little girl at the front, about 6 years old, broke away from the group and ran straight to Shadow. She was small and thin, with a halo of tangled blonde hair and a sweater several sizes too big slipping off one shoulder. Her face was smudged with dirt, but her pale blue eyes were fixed entirely on the German Shepherd. Shadow lowered himself to the floor, letting her wrap thin arms around his neck. She buried her face in his fur, and he stayed still, the only movement the slow sweep of his tail over the dusty boards. Ryan's breath caught, the girl's posture, the way she clung to the dog. It pulled him back years, to another little girl who had once run across a yard to meet him at the end of his shift. His daughter Lily, lost in a car accident when she was just 5. The memory hit hard, sharp as the winter air. Carla moved quickly, her voice low and steady as she knelt among the children. You're safe now. We're going to take you somewhere warm. Miles had already stepped to the far wall, scanning for signs of anyone else. The only door was the one they'd entered, and the only windows were sealed tight from within. Ryan crouched to meet the little girl's gaze. What's your name? He asked gently. She hesitated, then said, Emily. Her voice was hoarse, as though she hadn't used it much lately. Emily, do you know how long you've been here? She shook her head, one hand still gripping Shadow's collar. From the back of the group, a boy of about 12 spoke up, his dark hair falling into his eyes. They bring us food sometimes, but we can't leave. His voice trembled on the last word. Ryan exchanged a glance with Carla. Whoever they were, they might not be far. He keyed his radio again. Dispatch, be advised. We've got 23 miners here. Immediate transport and medical attention required. The reply came fast. More units were on their way. Shadow stayed close to Emily as Ryan and Carla began gently ushering the children toward the open door. The cold air made several of them flinch, their bodies curling inward against the sudden chill. Miles shed his jacket, draping it over the shoulders of a boy whose lips were tinged blue. Hang on, kid, he muttered, his usual awkwardness replaced by quiet determination. Ryan kept his attention moving between the tree line and the children filing out, every instinct telling him that time was short. Emily refused to let go of Shadow, and Ryan didn't try to separate them. Stay with him, he told her. He'll keep you safe. She nodded solemnly, pressing closer to the dog as they stepped into the snow. The sound of distant sirens began to filter through the trees, faint but growing. Relief edged into Ryan's chest, tempered by the knowledge that somewhere out there, the people responsible for this were still moving freely. But for now, the priority was getting these 23 children, Emily included, out of the woods and into safety. Shadow glanced back at him once, eyes steady, before guiding Emily toward the clearing. Snow swirled in lazy spirals outside the cabin door as Ryan kept the children moving in an uneven line toward the clearing. Emily clung to Shadow's collar, the German shepherd keeping a steady pace beside her, his body forming a warm barrier against the wind. Carla was at the rear of the line, guiding two younger boys who struggled to walk through the snow, while Miles ranged to the side, scanning the trees. The distant wail of sirens was closer now, an encouraging sound that promised heat and safety. But Ryan's instincts, honed by years of calls that had turned on a second, kept his focus sharp on the perimeter. Shadow's low growl reached him first. It was deep, vibrating through the dog's chest, a sound Ryan had learned meant one thing: a threat nearby. The shepherd's head turned toward the path leading deeper into the woods, his ears flattened, body tense as a drawn bow. Emily felt it too. Her small hands tightened on his fur, and she whispered, "What's wrong?" Before Ryan could answer, Shadow broke into a bark that was sharp and fast, warning and challenge in one. The dog lunged toward the cabin door they had just left, teeth bared, snow spraying from his paws. Ryan's eyes snapped to the movement, a man emerging from the tree line, heavy boots crunching over ice. He was tall, thick-shouldered under a stained canvas jacket, his face shadowed by the hood of a faded green parka. As he stepped into the open, Ryan saw his eyes, small, pale blue, and quick, darting between the children and the officers. Carla reacted instantly, pulling the two smallest boys behind her and drawing her sidearm. "Sheriff's office, stop where you are," she commanded, her voice cutting through the cold air. The man froze for half a second, then shifted his weight back as if considering flight. Shadow didn't wait. The dog surged forward, closing the distance in seconds, his growl rising into a snarl. The man lifted an arm as if to shield himself, but Shadow hit him square in the chest, knocking him back into the snow. Ryan was already moving, boots pounding over the frozen ground. He closed the gap, dropping to one knee to secure Shadow by the harness while Carla moved into cover. "On your stomach now," Ryan barked. The man hesitated, then spat into the snow but complied, turning over with a grunt. Ryan caught a better look, unshaven, skin weathered and red from the cold, a scar cutting across the bridge of his nose. His age was hard to place, maybe late 30s, but his expression carried the defiance of someone used to control, not being controlled. Miles arrived, breath puffing in the frigid air, cuffs already in hand. "Got him," he said, snapping the metal around the man's wrists. The suspect jerked once but was held firm between Ryan and Miles. Shadow stayed close, muscles still coiled, eyes locked on the prisoner as if daring him to move. Carla holstered her weapon and turned to the children. "Everyone back toward the clearing. Stay together." Her voice was calm but firm, the kind of tone that carried authority without panic. Emily glanced from the man to Shadow, eyes wide. Ryan caught her gaze. "It's okay. He's not going to hurt anyone now." The prisoner muttered something under his breath, but the words were lost in the crunch of boots and the hiss of the wind through the trees. Ryan and Miles guided him toward the open space beside the cabin, where a narrow track led toward the incoming sound of engines. As they walked, Ryan's radio crackled to life. "Unit 4, this is dispatch. Be advised, the medical center reports your wife's condition is stable. She's resting and out of immediate danger." The relief hit him like a warm current against the cold, loosening the tight knot in his chest that had been there since the call. "Copy that," he replied, voice steady but softer. "Thank you." He caught Shadow's amber gaze for a moment and gave a subtle nod, as if the dog somehow shared the weight of that news. They reached the edge of the clearing just as the first cruiser rolled in, headlights slicing through the gray. Deputy Ray Mullins, a broad man in his 50s with a thick mustache and a voice that could carry across a football field, stepped out. "He the one?" he asked, jerking his chin toward the prisoner. "Yeah," Ryan said. "Caught him coming back toward the cabin. We'll need to question him about the kids." Ray's eyes hardened as they flicked toward the line of children waiting under Carla's watch. "We'll get it out of him," he said grimly, taking the man from Miles with a practiced grip. 2 more officers arrived to assist with securing the suspect and maintaining the scene. Shadow finally eased back from his tense stance, but his gaze never left the man until he was locked in the back of the cruiser. Emily edged closer to Ryan, still holding one hand in the dog's fur. "He's really brave," she whispered, nodding toward Shadow. Ryan smiled faintly. "He is, and so are you." The children were soon being escorted to the waiting vans that would take them to the hospital for evaluation. Ryan stayed back long enough to make sure the cabin was clear before following the group out, Shadow trotting at his side, his job far from over but his instincts proven right yet again. Snow fell more heavily now, soft flakes clinging to the wool blankets wrapped around the children's narrow shoulders. The air in the clearing was a mixture of crisp winter cold and the warm hum of running engines as emergency vans and ambulances idled, their headlights spilling pale yellow across the white ground. Paramedics moved with brisk efficiency, checking each child for injuries, their gloved hands steady despite the biting wind. Emily walked in the middle of the line, her small frame almost swallowed by the thick gray blanket draped over her. Her tangled blonde hair caught bits of snow, and her cheeks were flushed from the cold, but her eyes were fixed firmly ahead on the open space where the road began. At her side, Shadow matched her pace exactly, his body a constant shield between her and the noise around them. Every few steps, his head turned slightly toward her, as if to reassure himself she was still there. Emily's fingers clung to the thick fur along his neck, her knuckles pale from the tightness of her grip. Ryan kept a watchful eye on both of them as he coordinated with Carla. "Get the youngest loaded first," he told her, glancing toward a cluster of toddlers huddled near one of the vans. Carla nodded, her auburn hair damp under her knit cap, and began directing paramedics toward the most fragile children. One of the medics, a woman in her late 20s with dark brown skin and warm hazel eyes, crouched beside Emily to check her pulse. Her name tag read Nurse Janelle Parks, and she carried herself with the calm, patient manner of someone who had worked pediatric shifts in busy ERs. "You're safe now, sweetheart," Janelle said softly, wrapping a second blanket around Emily's shoulders. Emily gave her a tiny nod but didn't loosen her hold on Shadow. As the line moved forward, Emily looked up at Ryan. "Can I tell you something?" Her voice was small, barely audible over the crunch of boots and the murmur of voices. Ryan slowed his steps so they fell slightly behind the others. "Of course," he said. "I was at my grandma's house," Emily began, her words halting at first. "She lives on a farm, with a red barn and chickens that come right up to the porch. I was playing in the yard, throwing snow at the fence. Then, a truck stopped on the road." Her brow furrowed and she swallowed hard. "A man got out. He said he needed help finding his dog. I told him my grandma was inside, but he grabbed me before I could run." Ryan felt his jaw tighten. "Did you see his face?" Emily nodded. "He had a scar here," she said, pointing to her cheek, "and his hat was dirty. It smelled like smoke." She paused, eyes flicking down to Shadow. "I was scared, but I thought if I kept quiet, maybe I could get away. But we never stopped. Not until the cabin." Ryan crouched slightly so he could look her in the eyes without towering over her. "You did nothing wrong, Emily, and what you just told me is going to help us make sure no one else gets taken like that." She hesitated, then whispered, "There were other kids, not from here. They talked about a girl from the city and a boy from a campground." The pieces began to fit in Ryan's mind case reports from nearby counties about missing children, all within the last year, some taken from rural areas, others from places with easy road access. This was no isolated crime. He glanced toward Carla, who was helping a paramedic lift a sleepy toddler into the van. "We need to call in Detective Halverson," he murmured. Halverson was a seasoned investigator from the state's missing persons unit, a tall, rangy man with silver hair and a reputation for pulling threads until entire criminal networks unraveled. By the time the last of the children were inside the warm vehicles, the snow had begun to lighten, the flakes drifting more lazily through the air. Ryan climbed into the back of one of the vans, where Emily sat between two other girls her age, all three wrapped in blankets like small cocoons. Shadow jumped up effortlessly, settling on the floor at Emily's feet. The other girls eyed him warily at first, but when he lowered his head onto his paws with a soft sigh, their shoulders eased. As the van pulled away from the clearing, Ryan took out his radio. "Unit 4 to dispatch. I have a victim statement from one of the children linking the suspect to multiple abductions. Request contact with State Missing Persons Unit ASAP." The acknowledgement came quickly, tinged with urgency. Emily leaned sideways, resting her head against Shadow's back. "I like your dog," she said sleepily. Ryan managed a faint smile. "I like him too." He glanced down at Shadow, whose eyes were half closed but still tracking the movement of the van's windows. Even now, the dog's vigilance hadn't wavered. They emerged from the trees onto the main road, the sudden openness of the snowy fields a stark contrast to the claustrophobic press of the forest. The horizon glowed faintly with the distant lights of Green Hollow, and the van's headlights cut a bright path forward. Ryan felt the weight in his chest shift, not gone, but lighter. The children were heading toward warmth, toward safety. Emily's story had given them a trail to follow, and Shadow, ever at her side, had made sure she wasn't walking that trail alone. The snow in Green Hollow had eased into a fine dusting by the time Ryan stepped into the sheriff's office the next morning, Shadow padding silently at his side. The building's old radiator hissed in the corner, barely keeping the chill from the tiled floor. A long conference table had been cleared in the center of the squad room, now covered with maps, printed photographs, and a corkboard studded with push pins and red string. The air was thick with the smell of burnt coffee and the low hum of voices. Detective Eric Halverson stood at the head of the table, a tall man in his late 50s with angular features and silver hair cropped close to his head. He wore a charcoal overcoat over his suit, the kind of attire that made him look both out of place and in command in a rural station. Halverson's reputation preceded him. He'd been chasing organized crime for decades, and he had a knack for connecting small, overlooked details into something vast and damning. His sharp blue eyes tracked Ryan as he entered, then dipped briefly toward Shadow. "That the dog?" Halverson's voice was low, gravelly from years of chain smoking. Ryan nodded. "That's Shadow." Around the table, deputies and investigators from neighboring counties leaned over case files. Carla Jensen sat halfway down, pen tapping against her notebook, while Miles Turner hovered nearby with a stack of photographs from the crime scene. In the corner, a tech specialist named Leah Kim Slight, mid-30s, with dark hair pulled into a tight bun and glasses sliding down her nose, was running a laptop feed to a large monitor. Leah had a calm, meticulous way of speaking, as if every word had been measured before it left her mouth. Halverson gestured for Ryan to join them. "We've been cross-referencing Emily's statement with missing persons reports from the last 2 years. The pattern is clear: kids taken from rural properties, campgrounds, even small-town bus stops. The cabin you found? It's a holding site, nothing more. We've identified at least 3 others across the state." Leah tapped a key, and the monitor lit with a map of West Virginia peppered with red dots. Each dot is a confirmed abduction linked by timing, suspect vehicle descriptions, or forensic evidence. They move the children every few weeks to avoid detection. Your site was likely a stopover before transport out of state. Carla leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "Any idea how many are involved?" Halverson exhaled slowly. "We've got 4 names so far, including your suspect from yesterday. He's low-level muscle, though driver, maybe guard duty. The real operators stay 2 steps removed." Miles slid the photographs onto the table. "We pulled prints from the cabin door frame, a storage trunk, and food cans. Labs already matching them to known associates in the database." He glanced at Ryan, adding, "We also found tire impressions outside that match a van spotted near 2 other abduction sites." Shadow lay at Ryan's feet, his ears twitching occasionally as if he could sense the tension in the room. Ryan reached down, absently running his hand over the dog's head as he studied the board. "Emily said she heard the others talking about kids from out of town. That means they're moving them between sites, maybe mixing groups so it's harder for them to form a timeline." Halverson nodded. "Exactly. We're organizing simultaneous raids on the other locations tonight. With what you recovered prints, tire casts, and Emily's testimony, we have enough for warrants." The room shifted into motion as teams began organizing logistics. Carla started making calls to coordinate with state police, while Leah sent updated target coordinates to field units. Ryan stayed near the table, reviewing the map until his phone vibrated in his pocket. The caller ID flashed, "Emma, video." He stepped into the quieter hallway before answering. Emma's face filled the screen, pale but smiling, her auburn hair tucked behind her ears. The hospital bed's white sheets framed her like a backdrop. "Hey, you," she said softly. Her eyes flicked downward, and Ryan angled the phone to show Shadow, now sitting squarely beside him. Emma's lips trembled slightly. "That's the hero everyone's been talking about?" Her voice caught on the last word, and she blinked quickly. They told me it was his instincts that led you to those kids." Ryan glanced at Shadow, who tilted his head as if listening. "We followed his lead," Ryan admitted. "And he didn't miss." Emma's hand came into frame, brushing at her cheek. "You always said he was different. I guess now the whole world knows." For a moment, neither spoke, letting the quiet settle between them. Ryan could see the relief in her eyes, the way her shoulders had softened compared to the last time he'd seen her. "They've got you on the mend?" he asked. She nodded. "Doctor says I'll be home in a couple days. You just..." Come back safe, okay?" "I will," he promised. Before ending the call, Emma leaned closer to the camera. "And tell Shadow I owe him a steak." Ryan smiled faintly. "I'll pass it along." When he returned to the squad room, the tone had shifted, more urgent, more precise. Halverson was detailing the order of operations for the raids, his voice cutting cleanly through the buzz of conversation. Carla caught Ryan's eye as she hung up her phone. "State police are in. This could end tonight." Ryan rested a hand on Shadow's shoulder, feeling the steady rise and fall of the dog's breath. The night ahead would be dangerous, but the path forward was finally clear. The cabin had been just one piece of a larger puzzle, but now the edges were taking shape. And it had all begun with a shepherd in the snow staring at a door no one else thought to open. The morning air over Green Hollow was crisp and clear, the snow along Main Street catching the pale sunlight like scattered glass. News of the rescue had spread faster than the storm that had preceded it, and now the small mountain town buzzed with a rare energy. Cars lined the streets, and the church bells rang at the top of the hour, a sound more fitting for weddings or holidays than a Wednesday morning. Outside the town hall, a crowd gathered, bundled in heavy coats and knit scarves, cheeks pink from the cold but eyes warm with expectation. Ryan stood off to the side of the temporary stage that had been erected on the front steps. He was in uniform, the dark navy jacket pressed and spotless, though his boots still carried faint scuffs from the snow-packed trails. Shadow sat at his left heel, wearing a simple leather collar polished to a soft sheen. The dog was calm, eyes scanning the crowd with quiet vigilance. In the front row, families clung to each other, the line of children stretching out like a living testament to what had been saved. Tommy and Jake Miller stood between their parents, both boys looking healthier than the night of the rescue, though Jake still kept a protective arm slung over his younger brother's shoulders. Nearby, other parents bent low to whisper to their returned children, hands brushing hair back from foreheads, fingers gripping mittens, as though afraid to let go again. Emily sat in the second row beside Emma, Ryan's wife. Emma had been discharged from the hospital 2 days earlier, her auburn hair now loose around her shoulders and her complexion less pale. She wore a thick wool coat, one gloved hand resting lightly on Emily's knee. The little girl leaned into her, smiling shyly whenever someone waved in their direction. The mayor, Arthur Gaines, a tall man in his early 60s with a deep voice and a weathered face from years of farm work before politics, stepped up to the microphone. "Green Hollow is a small town," he began, his breath visible in the cold air, "but we've always been a strong one. In the past week we've seen that strength tested, and we've seen it answered, thanks to the courage of our own." He paused, letting the murmurs in the crowd settle. "Today, we welcome home 25 children who will sleep in their own beds tonight, and we honor the people who made that possible." He gestured toward Ryan, Deputy Ryan Porter, and his partner, Shadow. The applause rose instantly, not polite but loud and sustained, hands clapping mitten to mitten, boots stamping on the frozen ground. Shadow's ears flicked back briefly at the noise, then forward again as Ryan gave him a small pat on the side. When the applause faded, Mayor Gaines leaned in toward the microphone. "This is not just about a job well done. It's about instinct, perseverance, and the refusal to look away. Shadow, you may not understand these words, but we do, and we are grateful." He stepped aside as a city councilwoman in a red scarf approached, holding 2 plaques, one engraved with Ryan's name, the other with Shadow's. She handed them over with a smile, and for a moment the scene felt less like an official ceremony and more like neighbors exchanging thanks on a front porch. After the ceremony, people mingled in the cold, exchanging hugs, taking photographs, and kneeling to scratch behind Shadow's ears. The Miller family approached Ryan first. Robert Miller's handshake was firm but brief, his voice gruff with emotion. "You brought my boys back. I'll never forget that." Diane Miller's eyes were glassy, her hand resting lightly on Ryan's arm. "Thank you for trusting your dog." The boys both bent to give Shadow an awkward hug, Tommy whispering something into his fur before they moved on. Back at the Porter home that evening, the pace slowed. The old farmhouse sat at the edge of town, its wide porch dusted with snow. Inside, the air was warm with the smell of soup simmering on the stove. Emma moved easily now, ladling bowls while Ryan carried them to the kitchen table. Emily sat at the table's corner, her feet swinging above the floor, wearing a borrowed sweater that was too big for her. Shadow lay stretched out nearby, head resting on his paws but eyes tracking every movement. Emma looked across the table at Ryan. The social worker called today, she said gently. They're still looking for Emily's family, but it may take time. Ryan nodded. Then she stays here until they do. Emily looked between them, uncertainty flickering in her eyes. Is that okay? Ryan asked her. She smiled, small but real. Yeah. After dinner, the four of them stepped out onto the porch. The snow in the yard reflected the faint light from the windows, and the air was so still that the only sound was the crunch of boots on the steps. Ryan stood beside Emma, their shoulders brushing, while Emily crouched to wrap her arms around Shadow's neck. The dog sat patiently, tail thumping once against the wooden boards. From the road, a neighbor walking past raised a hand in greeting, and Ryan heard the faint hum of voices carried from town people still talking about the rescue, about the girl who'd found a safe place, about the dog who wouldn't give up. In that quiet moment, with his wife at his side, Emily leaning into Shadow, and the winter sky stretched endless above them, Ryan thought maybe they were right. Some connections weren't coincidence, they were rescue lines thrown across impossible distances, pulling people together exactly when they needed it most. Sometimes the greatest miracles are not written in the sky but walk beside us on four legs, wearing fur and carrying loyalty in their hearts. Shadow's instinct, courage, and refusal to give up remind us that God can work through any of his creations to protect the innocent and bring light into the darkest places. Just as he guided Ryan to those children, he can guide each of us to be someone's answer to prayer. In our daily lives, we may not face snow-covered forests or locked cabins, but we do face moments when we can choose compassion over indifference, action over silence. If this story touched your heart, share it so others can believe in second chances. Leave a comment with Amen if you believe God still works miracles today. And do not forget to subscribe, so together we can keep telling stories that prove faith, love, and courage will always win. May God bless you and your family.